Imagine we filled this room with 1,000 business owners and we were able to fast forward one generation. How many would be left? There would only be about 300 left that went to the next generation. And then if we went one more generation beyond that, there would only be 100 left. Approximately 900 will have passed away. 700 will pass away with the founder, and another 200 will pass away with the next generation, and there will only be 100 left. So just give me a sense. How many in the room would consider yourself a founder, first generation business owner? Hands? Okay, and second generation or successors? Any third generation? That's interesting. The room is as the numbers are. And this is very similar to why Andrew Carnegie said, clogs to clogs in 3 generations, right? This is very difficult. And you know, for me, I'm a second generation who came in and bought out my dad, who was a first generation business owner. My dad founded our business. And I can tell you that when I came into the business 17 years ago, as a second generation, we're always smarter than the first generation. Isn't that right? Now, there was a period of time when a number of questions were being answered from my dad to me that he's asking about me. Number 1, does Stuart even want to come into the business? Number 2, does he have the experience and the capability to do that? And number 3, how do I pass the reins? All very important questions and a very difficult process that, frankly, most businesses can't do. And you can see why so few actually pass on. And there's only one reason that we survived that very difficult process. And that's because fundamentally, my dad was in the business of helping business owners transfer their business. That's our business. We help people transfer wealth from one generation to the other while doing it successfully and maintaining the most important thing, transitioning not only the money, but the relationships as well. And yet, despite the fact that that's what we do, that that's what our business is, there are some pretty significant obstacles. And we knew what those obstacles were going into it, and it was still difficult. But certainly knowing those obstacles helped in how we were able to do that process successfully. And now, my dad's retired and enjoying life, and I get to run the show, which of course is a great honor, but it's also a lot more difficult than I had ever expected. And I think it was Mark Twain who said that the older he got, the smarter his dad became. And I've just noticed that my dad has a lot more wisdom than I gave him credit for before I actually bought it and took it over. And so what I want to do today is share with you what I think are the biggest obstacles to business succession. Because, you know, frankly, passing a business on at all is like playing chess. Passing a business on to a family member, that's like 3D chess. And now just another question. Who in the room recognizes or believes or expects that one day someone else will be looking after your clients? Show of hands. Okay, so you actually understood that question. Well, the reality is someone someday will be looking after your clients. And I don't want to make light of this because of the story we just heard about Jeff and his father, but one day we will either retire or be disabled or die, and someone else will be looking after our clients. The key is that we all have a choice. You have a choice whether this is going to happen voluntarily or involuntarily. And I believe you want this to happen voluntarily. And there's 3 primary reasons for this. Our businesses are our vision. They're our life. You've poured yourself into it, and you've invested your life in it. Number 2, people are often worried about the golden eggs. But what's more important, the golden goose or the golden eggs? Your business is the golden goose, and you want to make sure you pass on the golden goose, not just the golden eggs. And number 3, think of all the risks that you've taken to start it, to get it rolling into the place where it's operating well. And that was my dad's situation. Here he was, having taken all those risks. I think of the money that he risked, the time that was risked, the family events that he had to miss, working evenings and weekends, not to mention the energy that was invested into the business. And after having taken all those risks, what are the questions a founder has? Will the big day come? What happens with the big day? Will that child that you birthed, called your business, survive? Is there someone to take it over? Who are they? Who's the right person? How will you do that? How will you cash out in such a way that you can experience not only financial freedom, but also lifestyle freedom? What's the best way to do that? What I want to do is share with you what I think are the 3 biggest obstacles to passing on your business, whether it is to a family member or to a younger advisor or even just to another entity to sell it out. But how do you essentially cash in for the significant investment of money, time, and energy? How will you cash out in such a way that you enjoy the fruit of your labor afterward, not only financially, but in such a way where you feel a deep satisfaction and you can find that next thing? What's that next thing for you? Because none of us retires from everything. So what are you retiring to? So let's talk about these 3 challenges. Number 1 is conflict. There is the threat of serious conflict when you talk about looking for a successor. And if you think about it, it makes sense because I mentioned earlier how your business is your vision. It's your purpose. And you've got your own personality built into it, your own strengths, your own vision of the future. And now you're talking about transitioning this to someone else with different strengths, different personality, different vision for the future. And the reality is you're going to butt heads on those things. Very likely. We went through this in our own business and in our own succession with my dad. And I'll get into one of the main reasons, sources of that conflict in a minute. But I just want you to recognize that there is a threat of a lot of conflict when you're going through succession discussions. I have 3 daughters. And 3 years ago, when my oldest daughter was 12, I decided I wanted to take her on a father-daughter trip. So we planned a weekend away. There's a national park, beautiful national park, a couple hours north of here, Prince Albert National Park. And the 2 of us went up camping. 2-person tent, campfires, cooking over the open fire, going for hikes, going for bike rides. We had an amazing weekend. So we get back on Sunday night, and my middle daughter, who was 10 at the time, is like, "Hey, Dad, when's my turn?" So last year, she turned 12, and it was her turn. So we did a similar trip. Father-daughter, we went out, we tented, campfires, hikes, bike rides. Only difference was she chose Banff. Well, my oldest daughter was like, "Wait a minute, I didn't know Banff was an option." Neither did I, and I didn't think the location mattered. But it did. So now my youngest daughter, who's 11, she's planning her trip for next year, and I'm just scared she's going to choose France. Well, if it was tough if that was challenging, getting through the conflict of a simple father-daughter weekend, how much more of a challenge is it to pass on your baby, which is your business? And as I mentioned, we had our fair share of conflict as we worked through this succession plan with my dad. And one of the things that really helped us was we had a third person that was a little bit removed from the process that kind of helped talk my dad off the ledge a couple of times. And that was actually my mom. She played a very important role in those discussions, just as an outside party looking in. And while she was involved in her business, she wasn't directly involved in the succession discussions. And that was super helpful. So as you do this and get into this process yourself, highly encourage you to have someone on the outside that can look in and give you a bit of perspective. Okay, so conflict, first major obstacle. Number 2 is setting a date. Now, this is a big hurdle because if you think about it, when you're in business mode, you're in growth mode. When you own a business, you have to always be thinking about growth because if you're not growing, you're dying. And if you think about trying to set a date from when you're no longer going to be doing that, that is super hard because we're in the midst of growth, trying to figure out where's the next client going to come from? What's our next marketing strategy going to be? And now you're talking about a day when you're no longer going to be doing that. That is super hard. And as I mentioned earlier, your business is often your life's purpose and vision. And now you're thinking about a time when that business when your identity will no longer be tied to your business. That is not easy. And I'll admit, this was a real source of that conflict I talked about earlier in our succession plan. When we first initiated these discussions with my dad, it was myself and Jay Stark, my other 2 business partners, Tim and Andrea Hansen, weren't in the picture yet. You'll be hearing from them a bit later. But when Jay and I approached my dad on this, we felt we needed to understand what his plan was for retirement. for our own business purposes. We're building our own practices. And we knew that at some point he was going to retire. Didn't matter to us when. Maybe it's 5 years from now. Maybe it's 15 years from now. It's his choice. We weren't trying to push him, but we felt like we needed to know for our own business planning. We knew that he was working with all the most sophisticated and largest clients of the firm. And if we were going to take those on, we needed to have the capacity to do that. And so we approached him. He was pretty resistant at first because I think he felt like we were pressuring him to get out. We were pressuring him, I will admit that, but only to set a date. And that might not have been clear from the way we approached him, but that was our intent. So despite the fact that we maybe didn't approach him in the best way, it was really good that we did take that initiative because it got us talking. And what it got him doing was thinking about, what would we do if you weren't around anymore, Dad? We asked him, if something happened to you, if you were hit by a bus or if you died, God forbid, what would we do then? And that really helped him because it got him thinking about what's in his client's best interest. This was always one of his mantras. Clients' interests come first. And he started to think that there's something in this. There's something in this for my clients because it's better for them if I have a plan. So it did get him thinking, and it actually got him to getting around to setting a date. And it wasn't anything magical. It was his 65th birthday, the end of 2014. From there, we could work backwards to figure out a way to actually make this happen. And what was really important about setting the date was that it actually started to crystallize his view of retirement and about what would come next. He could go now, his brain could go to the challenge of what comes next. And now, as I mentioned before, my dad's retired and he's happy. So I remember 2015, May long weekend, I'm up at the lake, sitting on his deck, and I ask him, "So Dad, do you miss it?" He said, "Stu, not a bit." Such a cool moment. But you know what? I wasn't really that surprised because my dad's identity actually was not tied to his business. My parents and I are Christians. Our identity is in Jesus Christ. And all that it meant for him was that it was a change of focus. He was leaving his business behind, but he wasn't leaving his identity behind. His identity was going to be the same as it always was. But now it was, what does God have in store for me for this next phase of life? And they've found new passions. They've found new things to focus in on. When they go down south for the winter, they spend a couple of months volunteering with the organizations they care about. So the first two obstacles, managing conflict, the challenge of setting a date. But number 3, and this is the biggest obstacle of all, is no process. And when there's no process, most of the time, the founder rides the horse right into the grave. According to Toronto-based Market Logics, Inc., only about 10% of advisors actually have a plan that outlines who will take over, when, and how. And this is because it's so difficult, right? Why the business survival rates are so low. But here's the problem. If you don't have a process, nothing happens. And then death or disability can rear up unexpectedly, and now the business is in trouble. And we all know stories like this. Businesses that suffered because there was no plan in place, like Jeff's story. Now, they were able to survive it, but so many don't. And I would say, it's a little like, if you think about it, imagine you want to start exercising, but you don't know what to do. Where do you start? You don't. You might try out a couple things, but nothing sticks. This is why New Year's resolutions never pan out. If I have a plan to follow, I'm good. But if I don't, I'm going to default back to what I always did, which is nothing. And I would say that the biggest myth is the Michael Jordan myth. You know Michael Jordan, arguably the best basketball player that ever lived, but he could not make it playing baseball. And I think that's a bit of the challenge that we have. We're good at running our businesses, but are we good at passing the business on? We're good at giving advice to our clients, but are we good at following it ourselves? I don't think so. So given all these obstacles that are in the way, it's no wonder that business survival rates are so low. And that's why Andrew Carnegie said, clogs to clogs in 3 generations. And by the way, it doesn't matter. It's not a Canadian thing. It's not a US thing. It's not a European thing. It's everywhere. It was rice fields to rice fields in Japan. It's the same thing. Wealth doesn't make it 3 generations unless you work at it. I'm convinced that nothing that happens automatically is good. Think about it. It's always bad. And this is really difficult because we're all busy running our businesses. But you know what? I'm grateful. I'm grateful that as we went through this, we had a process to follow because we had been doing it for so long for others. And my parents are living proof that this works. To see them now enjoying their retirement, fulfilled and happy, it's really, really cool to see. And I appreciate my parents because without their confidence in me, I wouldn't be where I am today. One final thing. This is hard stuff, but it's super important, especially for us as a profession. I believe we need to walk the talk because we owe it to our clients to set a good example. It's talked about that we have a fiduciary responsibility. What does that mean? It means putting our clients' interests first. And it's in their best interest that we put a plan in place voluntarily. So what should you do? We're convinced it's important to take action. I can still remember I didn't pay attention to my car. I got those warning lights. Maybe you can relate to this. Do you ever get those warning lights? I always notice that once those warning lights are on for a while, I don't even see them anymore. It's really interesting. And then you know what? It can go on for a while. And then I get super annoyed and frustrated when the car breaks down. And it always seems to happen at the most inopportune moment, don't you find? Well, I just want to tell you that if you own your own business, the warning lights are there. So I just want to encourage you to take some action.